and he made the correct observation that CBD is sold in all 50 states, that the millions of people that use it are not going to stop because the FDA says that it's illegal. Obviously, that horse left the barn. And what he suggested was, in his words, it is a fool's errand, to try to stop consumer access to CBD because so many people are using it. And he said what we ought to do is educate and inform them so they make intelligent decisions and put a regulatory structure around it so that we make sure that the CBD products that they purchase are truly CBD, that they're quality, manufactured in a quality way, and they're free from contaminants and adulterants. Well, that's the model we want for trading. And that's the same model that we think that the FDA will eventually have to enact as we get further down the road. And I'm certain when Commissioner Hahn got back out to the FDA headquarters yesterday, he got his hands smacked because we didn't hear anything more from him about CBD in the intervening months. But at least we're making progress, and it is that kind of clear thinking that we hope that the next administration will further captured by the bureaucracy of the FDA. That's where we reach back. The KCC will not only work at the state level, they'll be helping us at the federal level as well. Let me just give you one quick update too before I turn it over to questions, and that relates to the supply of kratom. All of you know that the majority of the kratom raw materials that come into the United States originate in Indonesia, which is one of the primary growing regions in Southeast Asia where kratom grows so ubiquitously. We have been struggling with this issue because the FDA, while they are not permitted under federal law to ban kratom in terms of its access to the marketplace, they do have the power to impose this import alert. And as wrong as it is, because the import alert was never designed to be a blanket ban on a particular product, it was designed rather to be a ban on an adulterated or contaminated product from a specific vendor. So the theory is that the FDA would be able to impose an import alert on a named vendor in another country that is importing into the United States a contaminated or adulterated product. There is no basis for the FDA to make the claim that all kratom materials are contaminated with Salmonella or E. coli. We certainly have made real progress on cleaning up that problem, but it's not unique to a product that is a botanical product. We know that we struggle across the board with those kinds of vegetables and fruits and that kind of thing, and so kratom is not unique. But it was certainly not designed to allow the FDA to classify all kratom materials as adulterated or contaminated or as unapproved drugs. And that's what they've done. So we're working with the Indonesian government currently to see if we can negotiate through them and through their embassy with the FDA to establish a systematic process whereby there can be a certification about the purity of the kratom products and the lack of contaminants and adulterants in those products, to put pressure on the FDA to fess up to what their real problem is, which is they want to expand the regulatory control they have over kratom, put all of the kratom dealers out of business, and then open the door for a pharmaceutical company to come in and create a synthetic version of kratom, which everyone generally acknowledges is going to be very useful in the fight against opioids. But no drug company is going to have the slightest interest in doing that if the same effects can be achieved from a natural plant that is available in the marketplace. And therein you see the problem, and the motion withdrawn an application or notice of intent to schedule, as they did with kratom. And we all know that the premise of granting to the Drug Enforcement Administration the authority to schedule dangerous substances is to protect the public health. That is a job they take seriously. In 2016, they caught the FDA in their tracks, making a bad case. The burden could not be met as prescribed by the Controlled Substances Act. And when the FDA reapplied, using what they considered to be much more powerful evidence to meet the criteria, and frankly, we had to lie to do it, in 2017, the DEA typically would react within 90 days. Because within that 90-day period, and usually it's a very dangerous substance, meaning it kills people, which is what the FDA claims to kratom, the DEA would act swiftly. It has been more than 3 years, and the DEA has said nothing. And you look at the overwhelming evidence that's been provided by the National Institute on Drug Abuse when Director Nora Volkow stood before or sat before in testimony under oath the House Appropriations Committee when asked by Congressman Pocan, Should we ban kratom? Should it be scheduled? And she said no. We see all of this evidence of people that are successfully using it to cope with opioid addictions and to use the way that they did that to limit our ability to get a response back or not, I don't know. But there were 51 members of the House of Representatives who stepped up and signed that letter. 25 Democrats and 26 Republicans. And that's as bipartisan as you get. And then you look at the Senate, there were 13 members of the U.S. Senate, and you look at the philosophical divide. On one hand, you had then United States Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, who has since retired, who signed the letter saying to the DEA, do not ban kratom. And then you had Bernie Sanders, who without question was the most liberal member of the United States Senate, and he signed the same letter. That gives you a perspective about how this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue about choice, about freedom. Individual consumers making intelligent decisions and informed decisions about products that they will use to maintain their health and well-being. The FDA doesn't want us to have that authority. They want us to, or that ability to make that decision. They want to dictate those things. And there are lots of cross-cutting agendas that the FDA has in their obvious overreach to expand their regulatory authority. It is a continuation of their effort that they started back in the early 70s, where they started the battle about banning all dietary supplements and vitamins. They actually wanted dietary supplements and vitamins to be a part of the new drug application process, which today costs $3 to $5 billion and goes for 10 years. They knew in the early 90s, when they really ramped up the pressure against dietary supplements and vitamins, and guess what they said about them? They were killing them, called the Shea Act, which if the FDA had the authority or power to do, they would repeal it today. They hate it because it limits their authority in regulating dietary supplements and vitamins. They want the same power to regulate completely kratom, and we're going to eventually get to the point where the Congress is going to have to slap them down on this issue as well. It's not a partisan issue. The opportunity with the change in administration gives us the chance to have someone new, and we hope it's someone new, at the FDA that walks through the doors without any of the background and comes in with a presumption that they're going to pressure test this argument against kratom, having heard from our advocates down on Capitol Hill. So that's our goal, and we're going to continue to fight that as hard as we can.
Thank you, Matt. One of the questions that we get quite often, and we're going to see a little bit more of an example of this as we get into the legislative season, is the need for the American Kratom Association to frequently ask for donations. And over time, we've been even criticized for asking for donations and asking for people's support. I guess I've got my reaction to that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the need to reach out to the community to get support to help pay for the resources needed to keep kratom legal.
Well, in 2016, when I was called by the then president of the AKA to help with this issue, obviously it was an organization that was not adequately funded for the fight that we had to take on. It was a real challenge, but the kratom community rose up, and they funded the effort that was necessary to get the scientists involved, the lobbyists involved, and that has been sustained and has grown over the last, since 2016, the last 4 years. This is a consumer-based organization. There are vendors who benefit from the continued access to the marketplace in selling their kratom products. But the vendors sometimes are at odds with us, because our first priority is to protect consumer access to kratom, and our second part of that, and it's an essential part of it, is to make sure that we are putting in the hands of consumers safe products that are not adulterated, improper and impermissible health claims are not made. And so we have some tension with the kratom vendor community. Some have been very helpful to us, but this effort would not be possible except for the generous contributions of the advocates for kratom who want to keep it legal. This past 8 months has been horrendous for all of us. It has pinched the economic capability of individual donors, because COVID put many out of work, obviously put us at risk economically. But we've seen amazing examples of the generosity and the commitment of many people in the kratom community who see the necessity for us to continue our efforts. And so we're grateful to every one of you who steps up and makes the contributions, even when it's tough to do it. And our pledge on our end is to make sure that your money is spent properly. Make sure that we squeeze every penny out of it in terms of value to accomplish our objective. We run a pretty lean machine. We do have to hire lobbyists in some of these states because it's the only way to get the thing done. And that sometimes can be expensive, and that requires us to ask for money. I know that it's frustrating for some. We have critics. There are people that think that they can run this thing better. And by the way, maybe they can. We do our best. We try to consult with people. We develop a consensus strategy. I know that there are some vendors who are upset with the fact, and they tell their customers they're upset with the AKA because we are requiring a higher level of compliance with good manufacturing standards. And so we hear carping. I had the occasion this weekend to have an interchange with an individual who took offense at something I had reported in one of our recent calls, which addressed a frustration by one of our donors, well, actually more than one, several vendors who have stepped up. They comply with it. They do independent third-party audits to verify compliance with good manufacturing standards. If the FDA were doing their job, that's what all kratom processors would have to do today, because kratom's a food, and it would have to be governed by a set of regulations specific to kratom being a food that will be imposed by and overseen by the FDA. But the FDA has decided to try to let us self-implode. Their theory, and it's much what they did in the 90s with vitamins, dietary supplements and vitamins, they thought the industry would kill itself. Because in an unregulated industry, then you're going to have bad actors that run rampant because they rely upon money to be the corrupting influence with consumers. Cheap products. Well, I'll buy the cheaper product. Well, how is it sold that cheap? It's because they're not doing the adequate testing or investing, the processors not, investing in the equipment that's necessary to maintain GMP compliance with FDA regulations for the processing of foods. And so if you buy the cheap stuff, it forces the legitimate vendors out of the marketplace. That's their theory. So we want to have the KCPA placed in every state that we can. And if you are living in a state where we are not currently promoting this, then help us by identifying your local legislator to see if they'll help. Here's how it's done. You pick up the phone and you call your legislator and say, do you know what kratom is? There's a toolkit that has the briefings that we'll give to you that you can send to them. But it's a simple message. Do you know what kratom is? I use it. This is how I use it. I want it to be safe. I want to get rid of the bad actors. And I would like you and invite you to look at supporting the Kratom Consumer Protection Act and then pass it off to us. And we'll get the information to them. And we'll start to develop an advocacy program around that call to that legislator in order to get this thing started. So don't think that because you're in a state that currently isn't on our target list that we couldn't use or add that state to the Kratom Consumer Protection Act initiative. Because we'd love to do it, and it just takes people getting involved in doing it. I would like to say that we can in every state do it without lobbyists. We can't, but there are some states where we could and have done it in the past without a hired lobbyist, and we just need your help in order to get that done.
Very good. I just got a text back from an individual who wanted to hear a little bit more information about Indonesia and the potential ban of kratom coming out of Indonesia. And this person specifically asked about purchasing direct from Indonesian kratom, Indonesia kratom. What are the thoughts of the AKA about individuals purchasing direct from Indonesia? I know I get flooded with them, the ads on Instagram or Facebook. What's the position of the AKA on that?
So I've had over the past 2 months extensive conversations with government officials. As probably most of you know, Indonesia is exactly 12 hours ahead of us. And most of these government officials think that around 1 or 2 in the afternoon is a good time to be talking to me. So I spend a lot of time in the middle of the night talking on Zoom calls like this. Now, I've been over there several times. The face-to-face conversations are a lot better. Zoom, we have to rely on Zoom right now. The Asians like, just as a customary business practice, to have face-to-face discussions. They want to assess you. They want to size you up. And I wish we were able to go there in order to have these, what I call confirmatory meetings, because we've set the stage for many of our friends in the Indonesian government to adopt a more reasonable policy with respect to the export of kratom products. Here's the concern that they have. They have been contacted through the Indonesian embassy in Washington, D.C. by the FDA. And the FDA has added kratom to the list of targeted products, and there are about 40-some products that the FDA has on their red list that they gave to the Indonesian embassy, saying, you've got to help us shut down all of the, in the case of kratom, the growers, but in the case of shrimp or fishermen, they have a whole list of these kind of products that they think they need the Indonesian government's help with. And that's what has triggered this concern by the BNN, which is the equivalent of the DEA over in Indonesia. They have the responsibility in this particular area for the restrictions on kratom. The FDA also recruited BPOM, which is the FDA over in Indonesia. BPOM initially was supportive of a ban on all kratom products that was supposed to take 5 years from 2019. BNN has now accelerated that to next year. Now, there is no reasonable way that they could get compliance with that ban of export. They certainly, and we don't want to interfere, and I reassure them on this occasion, we don't want to interfere with the domestic policy on kratom, which is influenced heavily by cultural and religious restrictions on use of products like kratom that have a different classification there in Indonesia. But the export channel, we think, should be open, and the only barrier to that is the FDA's import of it. So we are working closely with the BNN and BPOM in order to get some sort of an accommodation where we could go to the FDA through their embassy saying, what if we were able to assure you a contaminant-free or a relatively risk-free of contamination and a quality product to make sure there are adulterants? Because there are some finished good products of kratom coming out of Indonesia. The barrier to that is that the small growers do not want any interference by the Indonesian government because they've established a very good supply chain to individual kratom consumers in the United States. Here's the problem. I've sat there and watched down in the growing regions. I stood and observed as they were picking the kratom leaves and laying them on a tarp on the ground to dry. It takes a couple of days of drying, and then they pack them into bags and they take them to a processing facility where they grind them. Here's the problem with that process. They use river water to wash the leaves. That is polluted water. They don't have a good sanitation system over there in Indonesia. They cannot use non-potable water to be cleaning those leaves. They then lay them on tarps that have not been cleaned or sanitized. They use them for this over and over again. They just lay them on the ground. There's no consideration as to which side was up the last time they laid it out. So there's a lot of contamination. Chickens were running across the tarp of the kratom leaves when I was standing there. I believe that was probably the source of some salmonella contamination. I have learned since that it's actually a very small lizard-like creature that is indigenous to that area of the world, and that's the source of the salmonella. They need to elevate the leaves on drying shelves in a covered and screened enclosure for drying shelves. They've started that process, but not very many do it right now. When they got to the grinding facility, they were using World War II era copy grinding machines where literally the metal on the gears that were grinding the kratom leaves were flaking off into the kratom product. And that accounts for some of the potential heavy metal contamination that occurs in kratom. We made some recommendations to them about how those processes can be improved. We're seeing significant improvement, but I can assure you that group of small farmers over there, they don't want any interference, and I don't think you're seeing much quality control. Now, other than in the processing side, because the small farmers all take them to a centralized co-op farming or processing operation, and there we're seeing significant improvement in using food-grade stainless steel grinders replacing those World War copy grinders. But out in the boonies, I can tell you they're still using those grinders, even as recently as a year ago when I was there. And so there's more work that needs to be done. If you are buying from an individual farmer over in Indonesia directly, and they are shipping it to you, you have some problems. One is that because of price competition, many of those small farmers are now adding in a lot of stems and non-kratom plants in order to boost the volume. We've had numerous reports of that. The BNN and VPOM both are deeply concerned about it. VPOM representatives told me on a call about a month and a half ago that they had asked for some of these processors to bring their kratom in to test it, because one of the things that we've encouraged them to do is to have a certificate of analysis of the shipments of kratom. They identified a high-level E. coli in one of the large shipments that have been processed. And they told the vendor, the processor, you've got to destroy that. And he said, oh, no, I could just sell it directly. I'm not going to ship it through a big container. So they went and sold it, from what we can tell, onto the market to the small vendors. Now, thankfully, we didn't see anybody dying or getting sick from it that we know of, but that's the risk that you take. So as difficult as this is, we have simply got to accept the fact that a quality standard is an essential part of the maintaining the legal access to kratom here in the United States. And it's true here as well. When kratom arrives in the United States and is processed by an American vendor, they've got to maintain GMP standards in the processing of their kratom products. If they fail to do so, and they can sell it cheaper, there's no question about that, we're actually signing our own death warrant, because eventually it'll catch up with us. And the FDA uses the excuse for the import alert, saying there is a pervasive salmonella contamination, E. coli, and a pervasive adulteration problem. That's what we're trying to clean up. So this is, I know this is painful for some, but we just need to develop a better supply chain that's more secure as we go forward here to ensure that we can maintain the continued legal access of consumers to kratom in the United States.
And I definitely heard folks reaching out to me, increase of folks having their shipments seized because of FDA working with UPS or DHL on seizing some of those direct from Indonesia shipments to consumers here in the U.S.
Yeah, and I've got some people that are on my Facebook friends list and on my LinkedIn account that are growers over there, small farmers, and they complained to me bitterly about the FDA doing that, but they found alternate shipping routes. So good entrepreneurs are obviously creative and are able to do this, and good on them, but they ought to focus their efforts on making sure that it's not contaminated and not in any way adulterated in a way that's going to improve health.
Well, that looks like all the questions that we have. As a reminder, I've been recording this. I will send out a recording to everyone. If you know of anyone who would like to hear this, please forward that to them. I see many of our kratom advocates on the calls, Derek, Lois, Melody, Angie, and Robin, who work so hard on our AKA forum. Just want to thank everyone for all that you do. 2020 was a challenging year. We had thankfully some good successes, but I'm very hopeful and optimistic that 2021 is going to be a much better year. Mac, thank you very much for all that you do. Any last thoughts, Mac, before we end the call?
No, just to end by saying thank you again to all of you who work so hard to support us out there, and please accept the sincere apology that we aren't as thankful as we should be in expressing those thanks. And let me take this chance to now. I can't tell you how important it is.
Absolutely. Everyone, Happy New Year and have a great evening. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
You.
Bye.
Nah, selesai. Happy New Year.